So, hello everybody. It is a pleasure to welcome so many people to this panel discussion hosted by York St John University and in commemoration of International Women's Day. I'm Dr Esther McIntosh, Associate Head of the School of Humanities for Religion, Politics and International Relations. And I'm delighted to be joined on this panel tonight by my colleague, Dr Ernestine Gheyoh Ndzi, Senior Lecturer in Law in the York Business School, as well as Felicia Willow, the Fawcett Society's interim CEO and a human rights lawyer, and Sarah Hill, the Chief Executive Officer at IDAS, which is the Independent Domestic Abuse Service. So, Felicia, can we start with you? Can you tell us a bit more about the background and the aims of the Fawcett Society?
Of course. The Fawcett Society is the UK's leading membership charity, and we campaign on gender equality and women's rights, particularly at work and home and in public life. It was actually set up based on the work of Millicent Fawcett, who campaigned for the suffrage movement, for women to have the right to vote from when she was in her late teens. And it took her something like 67 years before she actually saw that come to fruition. So it was really a very interesting life. She wasn't a suffragette. I think that's one of the interesting things about Millicent. She was very much about working with government and looking at petitions and that kind of thing. She wasn't so much the throw yourself under the carriage type of thing. But we really try to continue her legacy of fighting sexism and gender inequality with very much an intersectional lens. And we do this through research, through campaigning. We work a lot with politicians. We do a lot of media work, and also some service as well in terms of equal pay. So we look at things like money, so rights to equal pay, rights to having good working conditions, power, so looking at women's leadership and also getting women in the halls of power and being part of the decision making. Challenging gender norms and stereotypes at all ages, and also helping women to know and realize their rights. So they're the four kind of main streams of work that we do. And I would say as a membership charity, we do also very strongly welcome people joining us. And there are some very affordable joining levels for students as well. So do think about it. We really need members to help us do what we do.
Great, fantastic. And Sarah, can you tell us a bit more about the background and the aims of IDAS?
Hi, yes, thank you for inviting me. So IDAS is the biggest specialist charity in Yorkshire now, and we support around 10,000 people each year who've experienced or are experiencing domestic abuse or sexual violence. We provide support to people in their own homes, therapeutic groups, and we also provide women's refuges and dispersed accommodation for a range of victims. Around about 95% of the people we support are women. We do have a fully inclusive service, so we support male victims too. We have teams specialising in all sorts of areas of work, like work with young people, work with people with mental health issues, people from LGBT communities. So we're quite an inclusive organisation. We also train and provide consultation with a range of agencies. We've done lots of good work with the universities in York locally, develop champion schemes and things like that. And we provide lots of online training free. So a big range of things, really.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
So, Felicia, if I could come back to you, we've all witnessed predominantly male faces at the government's regular coronavirus announcements and on their flagship news programmes. So what is the Fawcett Society doing to raise visibility of women?
Yeah, this is a really big issue for us. I think, it's not just who we've seen. You're absolutely right. I think we've seen one woman once at one of the briefings. It's also when you dig a little further, the chief medical officer, the chief scientific officer, and there's a SAGE advisory committee made up of 50 people. Of those, only 14 are women. So, we're not seeing enough women in the decision-making room about COVID. And I think that has really played out in how the response to COVID has been managed by the government. The Fawcett Society initiated a Make Women Visible campaign way back in about March last year. So about a year ago now, when this first was kicking off, we were really concerned about making sure the issues that women were facing and how things were going to be affecting them would be taken into account. And through that, we've done ongoing polling, and I'll run through some of the particularly interesting stats we found there. And also we've had these coronavirus diaries, which are really interesting. If you've got time to check out our website, we've been asking women questions throughout and just getting some voices about the different ways that coronavirus has affected them We know that men are more likely to die from coronavirus, and I think that can't be ignored. That from a health perspective is a bigger impact on men. But what we found is that the way that the pandemic has had consequences on women, and the things that have happened as a result of the pandemic policy response have disproportionately impacted on women. So what we know is that throughout the pandemic, women have been furloughed at higher rates than men, that twice as many mothers than fathers would have had to take off time off work to care for their children when schools closed, that about 2/3 of mothers were the ones who were mostly responsible for childcare, as opposed to about a quarter of fathers. We also know that women are disproportionately represented in places like retail, hospitality, leisure, travel, which are the sectors that have suffered most from lockdown closures and from the pandemic. We know that women make up 4 out of 5 care workers who've been the front line of the pandemic. And we also know women are more likely to be essential key workers. So it's about 3 in 5 women as opposed to 2 in 5 men. And mothers on the lowest incomes are 8 times more likely to have lost their jobs due to school closures. So we're seeing all of these things coming out. I mean, some good things that have happened recently is there was a cross-party report a couple of weeks ago from the Women and Equalities Select Committee, and they actually said the pandemic policy response had not only ignored women, it had also exacerbated the inequalities that were in our society. So I think we're starting to see people pick up on it. We haven't seen a lot of government action though, and that really leads us to really what we're doing about raising the visibility of women. Fawcett is really keen to see equal representation of women in politics at every level. So we're working both with regional governments. We're working at the moment with West Midlands and with Manchester on a gender manifesto for the upcoming mayoral elections. We've had some hustings around that. And we're also working on an equal power project. So if there's anyone watching who's interested in a political career, check that out. It's free training for women who are interested. It covers things like coping with online abuse, finding a party, those kind of things, becoming an MP. So there's training out there, and it's completely free. So what we're trying to do is provide the support, both in terms of workshops, but also networks, to help women take that step forward and get more women kind of coming into politics and being in the room, so that in future we're not going to see these kind of things handled quite so with a lack of a gendered lens, shall we say.
Great, so some fantastic visibility raising opportunities there, and we'll come back to some of these issues of homeschooling and care workers shortly. One issue in particular, Sarah, if I can come back to you, is we know that lockdown has highlighted the prevalence of domestic abuse. Have you witnessed a rise in calls or referrals to IDAS during the pandemic?
Yeah, it's been a really difficult time, I think, for anyone obviously experiencing domestic abuse, to be locked down and isolated with a perpetrator is like some kind of living nightmare. And I think one of the issues for us has been that we wanted to make our services accessible as possible. So we extended our helpline hours, and we put on things like additional live chat facilities so that people can access our services from the privacy of their own rooms if they needed to. And we have seen an increase in referrals. We've seen probably an increase of about 10-15% referrals. Sometimes we've seen bigger peaks in helpline calls than that even. Our concern, of course, is that whilst people are in lockdown, domestic abuse has often escalated for them. So what's perhaps started as quite an unhealthy relationship, the intensity of being locked together and the ability for someone to exert additional control and additional physical violence without feeling that they're monitored or going to be kind of brought to justice by anyone is kind of increased. So it's been a really difficult time, I think, for women to come forward. Although we've seen more kind of helpline calls, we're just worried that when lockdown sort of unlocks properly, that we'll have a further cascade, I suppose, of people needing that support because of what they've lived with and what they've put up with and kind of experienced during lockdown.
Yeah, and how do you think having to move things online has affected your training and support?
Well, we were quite lucky in that we'd already developed sort of online courses. So we were the first charity in the UK, domestic abuse charity, that delivered a lot of our training online already. So we had all of the setup to enable us to do that. I think for some people, it's worked really well. So young people, particularly like our live chat service, for instance, our WhatsApp service. So it doesn't seem as important for some people to meet in person, whereas some of our more isolated rural communities have really missed out on kind of being able to come to groups in person, as have some of our communities down in South Yorkshire. So some of our South Asian clients that really would prefer or don't have access to tech often will prefer to meet in person. So it's been a sort of a mixed bag, I think, Esther, that some people have actually kind of thrived, I think, from doing the online stuff and are absolutely perfectly happy with it, and others are really missing out on that personal contact.
So you'll be looking forward to maintaining some of that online
facilities
for some people, but also getting back to the face-to-face for others.
Definitely. And I think what's interesting, just picking up on some of the issues from Fawcett, it is that a lot of our staff are women as well. Mm-hmm. So they're facing all of those kind of issues that Felicia mentioned about kind of homeschooling, taking on care and responsibilities. And that actually suited some of them to be able to work from home and to provide some of that support online and to be able to work flexibly. I think that's been quite important for our staff as well as for our clients. So it's quite an interesting time.
Definitely. Ernestine, this would be a great point to bring you in as somebody who's experiencing homeschooling whilst also having a full-time job. And we know that statistically, women are responsible for more of the unpaid care work than men, as Fawcett Society has demonstrated and Felicia noted. Does this worry you, Ernestine?
It absolutely worries me because first thing first, I can see that the baby steps that we've taken over the years to try and gain some form of gender equality at home and in the workplace, the pandemic sort of set it back million steps for me, I would say. Being a full-time worker and having my two girls at home, it was so difficult. I think the natural sort of mother side of me cropped in, as well as the expectation, whether the expectation is actually thought about or unthought about, but kind of like both from my husband's side and the kids' side, they're like, oh, mommy's there. Let's go to mommy. She can give us this. I am hungry. I'm thinking, I'm teaching, I'm working. Your dad is downstairs. You can talk to, oh no, mommy's got to be you. And there is that expectation. And I think we start to see, we've seen a lot of it reflected in the impact the pandemic has had on women, mothers as a whole. Just like Felicia was saying, I think when we talk about frontline workers, mothers are they tick all the boxes when it comes to frontline workers, because and that is why you see that most women have had to lost their jobs, or they've either moved to precarious work because they're trying to actually combine all with the school closing and homeschooling. They've had to combine homeschooling with cooking and cleaning and looking after vulnerable adults and all that. It's fallen on their plate. Yes, we have seen that more data sort of being more actively involved, but still the expectation is landed very much on mothers' plates. I have experienced it, and I think like 3 weeks ago, I thought, you know what, my youngest daughter, I said, you've got to go to school, because the guilt part of it crops in. And sometimes I wonder whether my husband is looking at it that same way, the way I'm looking at it and all that. And going back to what Felicia was saying in terms of the number of women who've lost their jobs, the number of women who are in frontline working and all that, you can see it's really worrying. It is worrying because I think it goes much more further than what we think. We've obviously seen that mental health has been a big issue in this pandemic. Some of it is just that pressure. There's a lot of pressure on mothers. One of the things, certainly from my perspective, and obviously I think I can echo some mothers' perspectives as well, with homeschooling, there's that expectation that you will guide your child to achieve or attain what they should have attained at school, which is not possible. I know that for sure, like my daughters, I was taught differently. And when I try to teach them that way, it doesn't work. So there's that pressure, there's that guilt, there's that expectation, which shouldn't be there. And I think that that's been one of the biggest things. It really worries me because I'm thinking, what's going to happen next? the workplace institution is still very much modeled on the fact that men are the ones at work. And that is why, again, we still see lack of women at the top. So like the pandemic happened, depending on families, they will have to weigh in terms of financial cost, who is earning more, who is earning less. And unfortunately, most of the women, we tend to find ourselves in that lower category. And then there's that expectation, which I think people don't think about it, that, okay, you earn less, you can quit, you do the homeschooling, you do the cooking and the cleaning, I do that. But it is really worrying for me. And I think that is massively, massively taking gender equality backwards rather than forwards.
Yeah, we've seen this sort of reverting to traditional gender roles in the home, and also in the way the government approaches the issue. We've seen, you know, more focus on construction jobs, on infrastructure, than we have on the social care sector. And there's a racial element there as well, isn't there, Felicia? That the paid work in the social care sector is predominantly undertaken by women, including many Black and Asian women. Are they being underpaid?
Yes, and unfortunately, I think CLAPs don't actually get accepted by most banks, so we have a real problem there. Yeah, we know that it's about 1.5 million people or so who work in the adult social care sector in England. More than 80% of them are women. What's particularly interesting in that is that 3/4 are employed as direct care workers, and more than half work in care homes. And about 1/4 of jobs estimated to be operating on a 0-hour contract, which we know is really poor conditions, and there's no guarantees. That excludes those who might be self-employed, which of course are the kind of people who then have to pay for their own mileage and uniforms and everything else. What we also know is that Black, Asian and ethnic minority care workers are more likely than white British workers to be on flexible and temporary contracts. So they've got the double whammy of being in a low paid role, but also with the less security, more likely to be on that less security conditions. We do have a situation in the social care sector, adult social care sector at the moment. I think, we have a tendency as a country, as a society, to see these jobs as not important, and they are seen as women's work. And we see that attitude towards the value of women's work come across a lot of different sectors. I mean, there was an equal pay case not that long ago, and I never remember if it's Asda or Aldi, so I don't want to kind of defame which one it's not, but they were basically paying the men in the back office, kind of, getting the stuff up to be put onto trucks and sent off.
Warehouse, yeah.
The warehouse, that's the word, thank you. I was going for the charades thing where I described what I wanted to say. And the women who were on the shop floor, which had a similar level of skills and experience required, they were paying the men considerably more, and that was held to be a breach of an equal pay case. So we see this attitude to where there's work that is heavily populated by women, it is less valued, and it really says something about the attitudes we have towards women as a society. There are things that we've been calling for at the Fawcett Society, and that is things like increasing the wages of care workers to the minimum real living wage at a minimum, and also ensuring that there are appropriate terms and conditions in place. So, that people get their breaks, they don't have 0-hour contracts, they get paid for things like travel time, they get adequate PPE, something that's been incredibly important this year, and they get statutory sick pay. I think we've also got to recognize, I'm talking kind of generally about the adult care sector, but we know that there have been more than 10,000 deaths in care home residents from COVID this year. It may be more than that. And the fact that we've had these care workers who are being paid the way that they've, the level they've been paid, with the conditions they've had, and they've gone through what is a very deeply traumatic experience. I think that we as a society recognize how traumatic this has been for the families and for the people, obviously, who've passed away. But we've got to remember that there are workers in that room who are going through all of this as well, while being underpaid and having insecure conditions. And I just think, we have to do more than clap. We've got to take real action. And I know that the recent uplift wasn't about care workers, but when we're looking at 1% increases, it's not enough. It's not okay. We have to start valuing these feminized industries and value the people who work in them and do such essential work.
Absolutely, 1% for nurses and no mention of social care in the budget at all. So another side of the care issue, I think, is healthcare that's been provided to women during the pandemic. And we've heard lots of stories of pregnant women having to attend hospital appointments on their own, even when they were miscarrying and had other complications. Ernestine, I know that you've done some research on maternity outcomes for BAME women. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, I think, first of all, the pandemic, what it has, the impact it has had on mothers, expectant mothers, has been dreadful. The fact that some cannot attend antenatal classes, or you can't be accompanied, or even if you're having a child, you can't have anyone with you. It's been absolutely dreadful. But I think that probably for BAME women, it's gone further than that. If you think about the campaign that went on last year about 1 in 5, so like Black women, they are 4 times more likely to die from childbirth than white women, and the Asian people are twice as likely to die more than the white women. So there are all these issues there. And there was, the situation in the UK is kind of very similar to the situation in the US. And there was a paper that was published just a week ago, which was really, really dreadful. This was a Black woman who was pregnant and very early on at this 16 weeks, she started complaining that she wasn't feeling very well and was asking for a face-to-face appointment. And she wasn't given one because they said, it's COVID, we can't see you, until it got to 36 weeks. And she was literally, or the partner said, I can't do this anymore, I just have to take you in. They took her in and she died because she had complications and all that. Now, I think that because of all that, is there is a lot more to issues around BAME women being more likely to die in childbirth than the white counterpart. There's more in there. But I think with the pandemic, particularly in the UK, what has made it even worse is that campaign happened last year. So in so many ways, there's been a lot of anxiety. So a lot of Black men have been anxious and feeling stressed, and some of them even going into depression because they're thinking, well, these have been there, but it's kind of like not been spoken out clearly or loudly the way it was done by that campaign. Although we know that the campaign is meant to try and see where to get some change somewhere. But that has actually, because of the pandemic, it has created even more fear in BAME women who have been pregnant or going through childbirth during this pandemic. So it has really, really been a very stressful time. I have been doing some research. I haven't had a representative sample yet. And because one of the reasons is BAME people, they are not, there is always this issue around trust. So when you're doing a research, you've got to really know them and got to go into them before they can feel like they can grant you either complete your survey or grant you an interview. But the few that I've listened to or spoken to, they're just like, okay, this has always been there. And there's the other issue about racism as well. The fact that they don't believe that, or the fact that they don't believe that anyone is listening to them. And also the issue that they consider that Black people, for example, have a higher pain threshold than everybody else. So it's like they don't listen to them. So when they're asking for all those painkillers, like when you're pregnant and things like that, and you need them, it's like they're not readily given to them. So all that has caused a lot of anxiety. I think there's been a lot of anxiety. One, just because of the pandemic and the fact that it's really come to light that there's something going on. So it is a very, very difficult time. It's difficult for all pregnant women or women that have gone through pregnancy this period. But I think it's just been kind of another layer for BAME women as a whole because of other underlying issues that has been there.
Yeah, so this awareness of structural racism in the NHS itself is both an opportunity to change it, but also that awareness then creates this greater anxiety that you're talking about. So yeah, very difficult time for BAME women at the moment. Thank you, Ernestine. We look forward to seeing your further research on that issue and hopefully to see some progress and change there. Speaking of change, Sarah, the domestic abuse bill is being scrutinised in Parliament, having gone through various stages. Are you hopeful that this is going to bring about real change?
That's a really interesting question, isn't it? The domestic abuse bill does provide some opportunities. It provides some opportunities to rethink the training around the family courts and the training that those professionals have. It provides opportunities to educate and prevent. There are obviously opportunities to make new criminal offences. I think there have been various amendments suggested, and the non-fatal strangulation is a big one, which will become a criminal offence. I think you can have things made a criminal offence, but you need to enact those. So the criminal justice system is really complicated, and we've seen this with the 1% conviction rate for rape, which is horrendous because it's essentially legalising rape. There are all sorts of areas at which criminal justice systems can break down. So simply having something in the statute books doesn't necessarily mean that there is a positive change for those victims that are kind of victimised. So it really is an interesting one. It offers some opportunities. There are some disappointments around the domestic abuse bill. So thinking about racism, women without recourse to funds, migrant women aren't treated equally in the bill. They don't have access equally to legal remedies or housing or benefits. The family court system is notoriously difficult for female victims. There is still the presumption of contact in the family courts. So it's still presumed that unless someone is proven to be a very poor parent, they will still get access. And in terms of poor parenting, you're not considered necessarily to be a poor parent if you are abusive to your partner. You have to be shown to be actually physically abusive to children or sexually abusive to children. There's a lack of legal aid. There is the poor training of judges, and there's a new concept as well of parental alienation that's been used in the courts and discussed in the courts. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, Esther. I sound quite negative about it. I'm just suspicious that just because something perhaps goes through Parliament, that it won't necessarily be enacted, it won't lead to the actions that we want. One of the things that I just wanted to pick up on Ernestine's discussion as well was around women and pregnancy. So pregnancy is a big risk factor for women suffering domestic abuse. So it's a really interesting one to try to kind of incorporate in studies and in healthcare too. And also another point as well around the kind of the feelings of trust in the institutions that Black and Asian people don't have. So we know that there's such a problem of institutionalized racism. So in terms of domestic abuse, you're very unlikely to report to your partner if you are fearful that the police are going to be racist and are going to treat that person more, with more kind of harshness than a white person. So there are all sorts of complexities. It's not an easy one.
Yeah. So very, very challenging. That we hope if something's in law, then at least that gives you recourse to the law. But actually, when you know the statistics on conviction are so low, that puts you off reporting and going through all of that. You, Sarah. So we'll keep an eye on that domestic abuse bill and see if there's actually any change. Felicia, perhaps one more question for you, and then if our participants have questions, we can then start to go to audience questions. But this phrase, build back better, is one that we're seeing being bandied around as part of the coming out of lockdown. And we're starting to see lockdown restrictions ease in the coming months with this roadmap. So what does it mean to you to build back better?
I think we need to learn the lessons of what we've seen for the past year. I probably can be a little bit negative about this one. I think that there are some things that we can hope for. How much I think those hopes are realistic when we haven't seen women be centered in anything that's happened so far. I'm not going to hold my breath, but what our hopes are at the Fawcett Society, some of which I've already mentioned. We have valued our carers this year. We've recognized what they do. Let's take that further and give them decent terms and conditions and pay, as I've mentioned. That would be one thing that would be a way to build back better. Another one is around this. We've talked a lot about pregnancy and this impact on mothers. Now, we know there's a lot of research out there that this inequality that's happening within the family really starts at childbirth. And the way that maternity leave works in this country, the way shared parental leave works, very few fathers are taking up shared parental leave because it's taken basically from the mother is how it's seen. There's a lot of success in other countries where there's a maternity period and then both parents get a protected amount of leave each. And that has had huge impacts on equality in the home, so that when something like this happens, you don't see this slipping back to old-fashioned gender norms. So two things around that is, one, we've seen fathers do a lot more unpaid care this year. So while mothers are still taking disproportionately more, fathers have done more than they've ever done before. So it feels like now is a good time to be looking at this shared parental leave program and, enacting something different, making sure that fathers have that opportunity, employers support them to take that time, and that we see this change happen down the track. Second thing I was going to say around pregnancy is, if anybody hasn't read yet the Pregnant Then Screwed book, which came out, I think, about a week ago from Jolie Briley, I'm only about halfway through it myself because it's, it makes you really cross, but at the same time, it's a really great book. Thirdly, I think we've also been talking about intersectional impacts. We did have last year, on top of COVID, there was the Black Lives Matter protests and movement. And we also know how coronavirus has impacted disproportionately on Black and ethnic minority people as well. And I think that is actually getting something out in the public consciousness. When you talk about intersectional equality, when you talk about racism, I think people who maybe didn't previously recognize it are starting to understand on that. And also the way it intersects with gender as well. A lot of the research we've done, it looks at how these, different characteristics have increased the disproportionate impact. So, I think what we need to see, we've recently seen mandatory gender pay gap reporting brought back in again, but at the moment it's very minimal. There's no action plans to make things happen. And what we really need to add to it is ethnicity pay gap reporting as well. It's not always easy to do, but it's something that is a major problem. We have a big ethnicity pay gap, and it's something that there's a sign from the changes that are coming that maybe that would be something that it's the right time to do it. And finally, as we've also mentioned, around flexible working, we have seen people in a huge range of jobs successfully work different hours, strange hours, part-time, from home, lots of different things have happened. And we know that a big part of the gender pay gap is the way that women who go part-time tend to be paid less and lose opportunities to progress. I think it would be very hard for an employer to say, you can't do a good job from home, especially if the children are at school, going forward. And we would like to see the government legislate to make all jobs flexible, unless there's a clear business requirement not to, because obviously there are some where you can't, but the assumption should go the other way. And obviously that it'd be a day one right as well. So I think there are things that we've seen changing this past year. We've got this opportunity, let's hope that they get picked up and taken forward.
Brilliant. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they move on the working from home going forward, given that the government seems to be so concerned about the economy and people need to be in the city centres to be buying lunches and that sort of thing. And obviously working at home takes them away from doing that, but obviously makes working lives easier in terms of home life balance. So a couple of questions here from someone who maybe missed the introductions at the beginning, asking which charities you represent and where they can find the statistics that you're talking about. So perhaps Felicia and Sarah, you could just reiterate who it is you represent and where they can find more information.
Sure. I'm from the Fawcett Society. So if you just Google Fawcett Society COVID, you'll see that. We've got lots of publications on our website. So we cover more things than just COVID, but obviously we've done a lot this past year, but there's an equal pay report that's really worth reading as well from November last year. Obviously I would say everything that's on our website is worth reading, but if you're looking for a couple of key ones, the COVID page and the equal pay report are a good summary of what's been going on.
Brilliant.
And I'm from IDAS, which is a Yorkshire-based domestic abuse charity. And again, if you Google us, you'll find our website. And on the website, there's lots of information about survivors, their stories, facts and figures. But you can also do some free online training as well, which takes about 40-45 minutes.
Great, thank you, Sarah. So another question here, which you've partially answered already, probably Felicia, but it's a question here about the pandemic and the gender pay gap, and what effect do you think the pandemic has had on the gender pay gap, and what do you think the future of this will be post-pandemic?
Well, one of the things that obviously we weren't happy with is that the mandatory gender pay gap reporting got suspended last year. So the pandemic hit and they almost immediately suspended reporting. So I think about half of employers who were eligible to, which is only those with 250 employees or more, reported. We would then have been lobbying ever since to get it back. It's been reintroduced, but you don't have to report till October, but then you will have to submit reports back to April, and I believe for last year as well. So we don't, it's a bit frustrating because I can understand the business argument that last year we didn't know what we were facing, it was all a bit strange, what's happening with COVID, let's suspend it, even though I think that's the point at which we really need to know what's happening. This year we were adamant, come on, we know this year has had a huge impact on women. We need to get it back. So we're a bit frustrated with the 6-month delay because it means that we don't know. My expectation is it will be worse. I think we will see the gender pay gap increase because of all the different things that we've seen happen. I think the other thing that I'm particularly concerned about is kind of outside the gender pay gap in a way, but it's about redundancies. So when the furlough scheme ends, we've seen more women be furloughed. Will we see that translate into redundancies? Because my assumption is probably yes. And so, we've asked for employers to, release sex disaggregated data on their redundancies as well to make sure that there's somebody tracking that. But of course, that's not going to be introduced with the way the current government is looking. So, my fear is that it will get considerably worse, and that we'll have it'll take a long time to remedy what's been going on.
Sure, and this extension of furlough, on the one hand, that's great for people who need that extension of furlough, but on the other hand, that might just be delaying redundancies to later in the year. We don't know what's going to happen at that point. Thank you, Felicia. Another question here, has there been a particular effect of the pandemic in terms of equality on the LGBT community? Do you have any? Yes.
So we have some sort of experience. We have an LGBT team down in Sheffield who work with a lot of young people in the community, and we've also had the national organisation Gallup, which is the LGBT specialist organisation. And I think some suggestion is that young people particularly have experienced difficulties, particularly if they're living in hostile environments. So they might not be fully out to parents or family members, or if they are out, they've not got access to their normal support networks and can't go out and meet with friends. So I think we are hearing from that community, that particularly the young community, that there have been particular issues around isolation and being locked in with people that don't necessarily understand their particular needs. So, yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. There's a question, well, not a question here, like a comment in response to you particularly, from someone who works with APPG, alcohol harm, and linking to the domestic abuse bill and the DCB report around inequalities. And they're just saying, they're obviously aware of the need for gender-specific support in the services that they deliver too.
Thank you.
Ernestine, someone here is asking who you work for. They missed who you work for.
I work for York St. John University, so I'm a senior lecturer in the York Business School, specifically from a law background.
And so if they wanted to find your research, they could just Google you and get the university webpage, couldn't they?
Yes, absolutely. I work a lot on shared parental leave and zero-hours contracts as well. So, yeah.
Thank you, Ernestine. Another question for Felicia, just asking if the statistics that you've mentioned are on the Fawcett Society website.
Yes, I mean, they come from lots of different places. Some of it comes from our own research. We've done polling, and especially in partnership with other organisations. So with Women's Budget Group, with LSE, with Queen Mary, they've kind of each polling has been done with different partners, because we're very much a coalition organisation. We like to work with different organizations that bring different skill sets. But some of it also, the research we do also brings together existing information. So some of the stats are from like ONS or IFS and those kind of things. So if you, if you're looking for something COVID related, there's a COVID page on our website that should have most of it. But I mean, a lot of it will be in that Equal Pay Day report, I think, because I think that kind of does a good coverage of it. But yeah, it's also, we also get quoted quite a lot in the media. So if you Google a stat, you might just find it pop up. If there was something specific, I can, I can send it through afterwards or something.
There's a specific reference to the Women on the Sage committees. Is that on the Fawcett Society website as well, like statistics relating to the numbers of women on Sage committees in the in the regular coronavirus briefing?
I think it should be mentioned. It should be mentioned in there somewhere. It's certainly something I say a lot, because I think it's really, it's one of those areas. It's like, why 14? We have plenty of women who should be on that panel. There's not really any reason why that shouldn't be 50-50. Obviously getting into politics, there's all sorts of barriers in the way. But the government can choose more of its kind of key advisors and those kind of things. So yeah, I mean, if you Google that as well, that should just pop up. I know that that's definitely been quoted in various media reports as well. I mean, also, I imagine that if you go to the like information about the SAGE committee itself, as the SAGE advisory committee, it should set that out.
Should list them. Thank you. Felicia and Sarah, great question here. Do you have volunteering opportunities, both of you?
Sarah, do you want to go first this time?
Yeah, we do, absolutely, and a range of volunteering opportunities. So we have opportunities for volunteers to do hands-on work, to come and be involved in helping with helpline, live chat, that sort of stuff. And we also have volunteering opportunities for people to become IDAS champions, which is more around raising awareness, spreading the word, making sure that they are not bystanders if they see or hear something that's happening. And people can apply again via our website. So we've got an area that people can complete an application form. And then, yeah, we do welcome volunteers very much.
We have some volunteers. It's probably a lot less than what Sarah's just described. We have quite a small team. Fawcett looks a lot bigger on the outside than it is on the inside. But I know that earlier in this year, we were actually starting to put out some role descriptions, but unfortunately the person who was running that has had long COVID, so she's been out of the office for a while, which is a shame. So we will have some coming up. I think the main thing is, if you're interested, we've got like an info at address, I think, that just get in touch there. We're keeping track of people who are interested and the kind of things you might be wanting to do. We do have people support with some like kind of ground research if we're thinking about a new project, getting someone to do a bit of a Google blast, really, who's out there working on it, those kind of things. We've also got some more I guess higher level volunteer roles that we would be looking to recruit with specific experiences. I think the other thing that's really important to mention is our local groups. So as a membership organization, we don't just campaign Fawcett, centrally. We have a number of local groups that are set up by members and bring together people who are interested in what we're doing, and we provide support from Fawcett to help train and to give support in kind of how to do campaigns. Obviously, it has to be in line with what we do and our values and that kind of thing, but it's some really exciting things going on. I know there's one in London, I think it was, that was doing a ban asking the salary history campaign that very much aligns with the kind of things we say, and it was great to see them. They got some press coverage on their own bat. So there's a lot of things to get involved in as members as well, and local groups.
Great, thank you. Related to the gender pay gap, this is a question that those of us who work in feminist areas get asked a lot, but I'll let you answer this one, Felicia. The Global Institute for Women's Leadership at King's College London's recent global research with Ipsos Mori found that a quarter of men think the efforts to close the gender pay gap is political correctness gone too far. How do we change their minds?
What I try to do is talk to people about what the myths are around the gender pay gap. The problem is, if you read any, like, say, Daily Mail article about the gender pay gap and you go to the comments, it is filled with people saying, oh, it's all a myth. It's been proven to be a myth. You see a lot of that kind of language. We know it's not real. It's just that women making choices, and how dare you say that a woman can't make a choice? And I think that's, it's a very difficult thing to argue against, but there are some really important things to respond on, and to note that, other countries have taken action and have gotten rid of the gender pay gap. But I think, we definitely have some attitude issues around the gender pay gap. I mean, the other thing, I got one the other day that somebody said, we've had the Equal Pay Act in place since the 1970s, so this isn't a problem. And then you're like, okay, gender pay gap and equal pay are not the same thing. They're related and it's complicated. But, making sure that people understand that not only is equal pay not the same as a gender pay gap, but also equal pay is not always enforced, partly because we don't have the right to know. So we don't have the ability to find out what some man in our organization doing a similar job gets paid without taking the employer to an employment tribunal. So it's one of the things we've been campaigning for, is to get this right to know. So I think sometimes it's almost like I have a list somewhere actually that I've actually written up with the myths you know, this is what people say. No, it's actually this. I mean, one of the things you get is also, oh, it's because part-time work, you know, and it's like, yes, but it's done on the hour. It's not done on the overall salary. It's a kind of snapshot. So if somebody's getting paid less for part-time work, then that in itself is part of the gender pay gap. Why are women who work part-time get paid less than somebody who's doing the same job full-time? You know, there's an equal pay question, but there's also, it contributes to the gender pay gap more broadly. So I probably just like blurted a whole lot of things at you there rather than giving you that nice, neat list that I have when I'm prepared to answer that question. But it is really hard because it also, you have to stop yourself from like losing your temper in someone and going, oh my goodness, you have no idea. But it's, yeah, I think being really well armed with facts and stats, and read the Daily Mail to get yourself prepared with some potential questions. See what people say in the comments.
And I think in some ways the pandemic has actually shown the ways in which lots of the myths about the gender pay gap are myths, because of this idea that women just choose lower paid jobs, or women choose to work part-time to look after their children. And some may do, but there's also, we've seen with the pandemic, that women have been forced to reduce their hours to look after their children, or they've been forced to give up their job to look after their children in the ways that men haven't been. And so that's been quite clearly revealed. Sarah, there's a question for you related to your comment about contacting the family court system and how problematic that is. And the question is, what can be done to address this?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Just to say, if you're going to read the Daily Mail, don't buy a copy. Find some
online.
Find some other way to read it. But yeah, the presumption of contact, there's a brilliant campaign which is called the Child First campaign. It was started by an incredible survivor, a woman called Claire Throssell. You may have heard of her. Her 2 children were actually murdered by her ex-partner, who then killed himself. And since then, she's been campaigning for a whole swathe of changes in the family courts, and one of them is the presumption of contact. Because what happened in her case was that although there are all these kind of flags and warning signs that this guy shouldn't have contact with the children, he was still granted contact. So get behind the Child First campaign. Again, Google it. There's a petition. I think the petition is at about 75,000. We want it to get to that 100,000 mark so that it's debated. So yeah, really kind of galvanise behind that. I think that will be the best way to do it.
Thank you, Sarah. And another question for you related to older victims of domestic abuse. Are they a forgotten group?
Really difficult to reach out to older victims. There's a really nice resource that someone, an organisation called Solace Women's Aid have just developed, which is specifically around support for older victims. We support victims of any age. So I think our oldest victim last year was something like 86. So women do come forward, and they're often picked up or referred through adult social care. But it is difficult. The older victims, people living in rural communities as well, find it difficult to reach out. And I think if people have lived with abuse for years, often it's more difficult to talk about it. But I think if it's often family members, so we've had sons and daughters come through and say, look, my mum's lived with this for years. What can you do to help? So I think it's about us looking out for each other and for older people, and not just assuming that just because someone is older and has been in that relationship for years, that everything's okay, or that it's too late to do anything about it, because we've had some really good success cases with people making massive changes in their lives, really positive changes, even into their 70s and 80s.
Great, thank you, Sarah. There's a question here about the criminal justice system. Would the panel advise to read any particular research or articles on women in the criminal justice system and the ineffective use of sentencing? I would have thought Helena Kennedy's works here would be absolutely crucial. She's written a number of books about the way the British justice system fails women. And as someone very high up in the law system with a lot of experience, she doesn't actually think women should be in prison, because most of them have suffered from abuse and they're victims rather than perpetrators. Is there anything, Sarah, Felicia, Ernestine, you want to add to that?
Do you know, my brain is frozen at that one. I'd have to kind of do some more research. I know that over years I've read some really interesting research, and yeah, I'd have to kind of look back over my documents, I think, to get the best. But I'm happy to send any on.
I also am about a third of the way through a book that's about this. I wonder if it's the book you've just mentioned. I don't actually know who wrote it, but it's definitely not so much my field.
I've got one right here that I can. There's one right here I can hold up. I don't know if anybody.
Oh, it kind of goes as
can't
part of
see
your
that
background.
Because of the
background makes it weird.
Ah.
Oh no. Oh.
I think that might be the same book. The glimpse I had of it.
Yeah, well, this is Miss Justice: How British Law is Failing Women. This is one of her ladies' books.
I think I've got that one. Yeah, I've got it on my bedside table.
Yeah.
Just also reading Pregnant Then Screwed, so it's all just my bedtime reading gets quite busy.
I think the book you have there, Esther, is a fantastic book. But I think there's growing research around this area as well. So I think there will be more coming out around the criminal justice system and how women generally are treated, or how it works. So yeah, but that book that you have there, yes, is a very good book, which I do agree with that.
There's also the Corsi report, isn't there, that was about women in prisons and the vulnerability of women in prisons and what they've experienced in their life path, and suggests that at least 80% of women in prisons have been victims of some horrendous sexual violence, domestic abuse in their lifetimes.
And again, their situation has been exacerbated by the pandemic. So I don't know if people in the audience know, but because there are vastly fewer women are convicted than men, there are fewer women's prisons. So when they are sent to prison, they can be sent hundreds of miles away from their home, which makes it very difficult for them to maintain contact with their children. And so when they come out of prison, they're often homeless, which is more likely to push them back into crime. And they may also have lost contact with all family members, support networks, which makes it more difficult for them to kind of re-establish their lives on the outside. There's also been some recent research on religious women, so Muslim women in particular, being ostracized by their communities and not having the support when they come out of prison. You know, their communities might have lied about where they are and not told anybody they're in prison. So then what do they say when they come out of prison? How do they re-establish themselves and those community networks? So yeah, there's definitely more and more research coming out about this. And then during the pandemic, those women in prison who had been having contact with their children, that was cut off through the pandemic. And so there were children then who, you know, haven't seen their mothers. They weren't allowed iPads in their rooms. They weren't allowed to FaceTime. And it's been really problematic for them to maintain those contacts, both for the children and for the mothers themselves. There's a question here about leadership roles. Do we need to see job share leadership roles become the default?
Yeah, it's one of those ones. I have met some extraordinary women doing job share leadership roles, and I say women because I haven't actually ever met men do leadership, like, or joint roles at all, actually, job share. I personally can't imagine how it would work. I think you'd have to have a really good fit. I can't really imagine if they couldn't, you know, to advertise a job for two people, I think would be difficult. You've got to have that right relationship between the two. But that's very much me speaking personally. You know, I think that flexible working has to be taken in all of its connotations. You know, it's part-time, it's job share, it's different hours, it's different locations. You know, it's all the different things that work around how somebody needs to have the life that they want to have outside of their work time. And you know, job share is great. I just I guess the thing is, by default, I kind of think I'm not sure if I could do it. I'm probably too much of a control freak. But then I have done a lot of leadership roles part-time. You know, I'm an interim CEO, repeat interim CEO. So like last year, speaking of prisons, I was the interim at the Shannon Trust, which is a prison-based charity. It works across the country to teach prisoners who can read to train prisoners who can't. It's an amazing organization. And I was there for 7.5 months during the COVID kind of pandemic. But I did that 3 days a week. And because COVID hit, I was able to spread my 3 days across 5, which made my life much easier. And my husband took the other time. So, you know, I think that being open to the idea that you can be a leader and you don't have to be there 5 days a week. I am 5 days a week at Fawcett, plus, you know, but depending on the role and how it can be built and the kind of supports you can have, I think there's just so many different ways of thinking about it, and truly being flexible is good, you know, is the answer.
Well, it might be one way to have some positive discrimination, to make sure have more women in leadership roles, have more Black, Asian, ethnic minority people in leadership roles. If we set that as a standard, and changing the model of leadership altogether, so we don't see leadership as being this one kind of maverick person at the
Absolutely.
top, but
Yeah.
something much more collaborative. Ernestine, what do you think about leadership?
I think what Felicia said there, I absolutely agree. I think we need to, I really want to see a massive shift towards flexible working. But then I suppose that it could potentially, again, just kind of echoing what Felicia was saying in terms of job share in leadership positions, you will really need to get someone that you can, you really will work with very well. But I think that promoting more flexible working, I think the pandemic has shown all of us that we can do it from home. You can do it from anywhere, basically, so long as you've got internet and some peace and quiet somewhere, you can do it. So I think a big push towards that will be good. Again, just like you've said, there need to be more women going up the ladder. Certainly, I think looking at everything else, there is a need for some positive discrimination to happen in favor of women or in favor of BAME, because these are the big areas. But I really think that there is a need for that. There's also, this can be done in so many ways, and I think organizations need to start looking at how they can do that. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to go out. They can start to look at the ones they have in-house and really help them, build them, encourage them, give them the tools that they need to get to where they're supposed to be.
Thank you, Ernestine. Yeah, we are starting to run out of time now. There's one more question I'd like to ask, but it's probably, first of all, it's probably just worth saying that I think we also need to be cautious that because of the pandemic, people aren't forced to work at home who don't have a suitable environment at home to work from, and that's also been very problematic for some people. We can't just assume that everybody's got nice, quiet office space, you know, and working from home might not be possible. But there's a question here from someone who works with schools that says, I'm really concerned about messages that young girls and women get about their role and place in society. Does the Fawcett Society have specific resources for student teachers to use in working with school pupils?
We're kind of in the beginning phase of that. So there was a commission that brought together lots of different organizations. So education, there were political groups, kind of government officials, charities, businesses, people like Bright Horizons, lots of different people involved. And we did a commission on gender stereotypes. And that was looking at the way that gender stereotypes from the age of 0 to 7 affect later life, and the kind of messages that are being sent to our children, and then the impact that's having. And we looked at it from like looking at practitioners and the kind of training they get, which was found to not really be adequate on it, even though practitioners in the main get it. There's still some problematic things going on, commercial impacts, and also parents and what parents can do. So there is a report on our website called Unlimited Potential, which sets out kind of our findings, that does have some kind of both recommendations and some tips for things. We're now working on the next stage of that. So we've done some work with Pearson, which is a publisher working on trying to make their work kind of not gender stereotyped. And we're just doing some videos now with Bright Horizons, which I believe will have some things aimed at practitioners in it. We're hoping that that commission report is going to be the basis for a lot of new work as well, that we can take what's been found and turn it into something really valuable that has real impact. So I think the other thing, you know, we really want to see the Department for Education pick this up and improve training. So I think that's also a campaign type of position as well, because you still hear things, you still see things the way that you know, boys will be boys, and the assumptions about what girls and boys want to do. And so, you know, some of the statistics we got out of that were things like, you know, something like 25%, I may not have the stat exactly right, of parents could see their boys working in construction, but only 3% of parents could see their girls. And it was a similar kind of vice versa for nursing. You know, we've still got some very gendered assumptions about what children can become. So it's really about getting rid of those. So yeah, we don't have quite what you're probably looking for, but we're on the track, and it's definitely worth checking out the Unlimited Potential report and staying tuned for the video.
Yeah, thank you, Felicia. Yeah, I know there was also that recent report out about Pearson and other education providers of educational materials still producing picture books that have such gendered representation of girls and boys, mums and dads, and just you know, that they haven't really picked up on that was just quite shocking, that they were still producing books like that, but they are apparently on the case now, or so they say.
Yeah. I mean, I've been really impressed with a lot of the ones. I've got 2 sets for my kids. My son's 5 and he's learning to read. And, you know, the Biff, Chip and Kipper ones, you know, there was one episode where, there was one book where, it's how much TV I watch, you know, the mum's putting something in the washing machine, and then in the next scene, the dad is putting something in the washing machine. And it was like, because I was like, oh, mother's washing, they shouldn't do that. And then the next page, I was like, okay. You know, so it was, I kind of really noticed that I've got my high alert out, and I've been quite impressed with those ones, even though they are, you know, not the most exciting books, but my son loves them.
Brilliant. Well, lots of people saying, you know, thank you to the panel for a very interesting discussion. Thank you so much, Sarah, Felicia, Ernestine. It's been brilliant to have this opportunity to talk about the ways in which the pandemic has affected women and how we might build back better for all of us. Especially for women. And also thank you to the audience for your questions and for engaging with us in this debate. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks.